When we heard Nancy Pelosi make the announcement that there was going to be an impeachment inquiry, can you explain what that means exactly? Like, is the president impeached or not?
No, it's a good question. The president is not impeached. The president is only impeached once articles of impeachment have been officially filed and have been accepted and voted to pass by the House of Representatives. So all this means is that the calls for impeachment that have been coming from some of the Democratic Party and others that Nancy Pelosi has been sort of pushing off for a while, now she's saying, okay, we either have enough evidence or we see enough in front of us that we will begin to go through the process of drafting articles of impeachment. If we feel like the information we are able to gather now warrants it, then we can draft those articles. So the good thing for Pelosi and those who are involved in inquiry is that now that it has been officially launched as an inquiry, they have more access to documentation, subpoena power, and so forth, which they didn't have previously. So in some ways, this is just a strategic step to get more information to then see if the articles should be drawn up. There's some rumors circulating that they are being drawn up. Some are saying they're not being drawn up, but that would be the next step, would be drawing up the articles of impeachment.
So a lot of people we were hearing, it was politicians, journalists, news anchors, they were all saying that it was like a very historic moment.
Yes.
So can you explain why?
So I would say it's historic for two reasons. One, we've only ever had two presidents impeached before, and we've never had a president removed from office. The other, which I find to be most interesting, is that of the two presidents that were impeached before, none were running for re-election at the time. So we are in an active re-election campaign for a president as he's potentially being impeached. That is historic. Yeah.
Do we know what actually caused the inquiry to finally be called for?
No. I've been trying to think about this because that happens on a Tuesday night. The reconstructed transcript of the phone call between President Trump and the Ukrainian president, that goes public Wednesday, and the whistleblower complaint goes public Thursday. So those two pieces of documents that go public come after Nancy Pelosi says that they're going to start the inquiry. So I'm inclined to believe that there were things that those in the Congress had seen that we hadn't seen before, or there was some kind of information that was being shared among the intelligence committees that have clearance that they could share some to say this is coming, or it was there's enough of something else that we haven't seen or don't know about to say okay, at least we can move forward. It also could be that she was receiving a significant amount of pressure from a more progressive wing of the party and had been gatekeeping pretty tight. And it's not an impeachment, it's simply a strategic step to move forward. And so I think all of those reasons have something to do with why.
When we look at the whistleblower complaint, first off, have you had the chance to read it?
I have.
Can you tell us what it's actually saying?
Yes. So there are a couple of moving parts to this, and so some of it is what the whistleblower actually claims to have heard or witnessed, and then the other is the way that the Intelligence Community Inspector General handled it and the Director of National Intelligence handled it. So there's kind of some pieces. So it's just very concisely, if I can try to do that, although sometimes I'm not great at it. This person who has worked in the White House has secondhand knowledge, and also the way that it's communicated, observed, some things happening that seem to be outside of the norm or what's expected. And in particular, it was secondhand knowledge of a phone call where the president was not overtly, but the argument is in coded language, basically saying to the Ukrainian president, we have been very good to you and we will continue to be good to you if you do the following things for me. Now again, I am paraphrasing, and this is not what is word for word in it, but this is what others have suggested the tone of it was while there was no direct you do or I do quid pro quo, it was, if you want us to continue to do for you, then I need you to do something for me. And that was one of the concerning parts of it. And in particular, it was the president will give aid and funds to Ukraine if they help either find where the DNC server is, or help them dig up dirt on Joe Biden and Joe Biden's son, and Joe Biden is one of his political opponents. The second part that is in the complaint that I actually find the most concerning is what was done with the word-for-word transcript of that phone call. So the transcripts of phone calls between the president and foreign officials go on a server, a particular server. It's a word-for-word transcript. The report says that White House lawyers contacted White House officials and said, you need to take this off and put it on this high-level code clearance server. And that this was not the first time that a phone call from the president with another foreign leader had been put on this other high code clearance server. So I think that that's concerning. What we saw, and then what we were able to see, the actual phone call was a reconstructed transcript. It was not a transcript, and it was not word for word. There's that part. This is a lot, I know. But the other part is, why did we just find out about this? Why didn't we find out about it in May when it first occurred? So the whistleblower complaint is filed with the Inspector General of the Intelligence Committee, and at that point, it is that person's job to decide whether it's of urgent concern. And there's a very narrow definition for what urgent concern is. At that point, they decided this is not an urgent concern, and so it does not have to be disseminated to the intelligence committees in Congress. But there was enough concern to give it to the Director of National Intelligence, which doesn't always happen when these complaints come up. And it was at that point then that the Director of National Intelligence takes a look at it. And then after it starts to come out that this call occurred, then it was like, okay, now I have to talk to the White House lawyers and see if I can make it public. And then it was able to be made public. That's a lot. It's a lot going on.
I love it. I don't love it, but I think your explanation was so nice and detailed, and it's what's needed. Because I don't think we're hearing all of that from...
No, it's being boiled down to, it was quid pro quo. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. No, it wasn't. Someone broke the law. No, it's complicated. Yeah, it's a lot of moving pieces.
So last week when we saw the acting intelligence chief invoke executive privilege when he was asked if he discussed the complaint with the president.
Yes.
First, can you explain what executive privilege is?
Yes.
And second, what does it mean if he discussed the complaint with the president? What are the ramifications of that?
So, all good questions. Executive privilege is for those who work in the White House, who they are able to say when they are deposed or under oath that this communication that I had with another person is private and it is not, I do not have to divulge it. Now, there's a question over whether it's only reserved for people who currently work in the White House, or can people who used to work in the White House but no longer work in the White House invoke executive privilege? And also, are there people within the White House who can or can't? And so it's not clear cut. Right? What McGuire says, the acting director of national intelligence, is that normally he cannot and would not talk to anyone, particularly on television in front of the world, about a conversation with the president because it could compromise his relationship with the president. That is an important part of them being able to act as a team in instances. And so his reluctance to say yes or no, yes I did or no I didn't, was because his iterative interactions with the president, and he doesn't want to compromise that in any way. Is that, yeah.
Can Congress force a person to answer and be like, that, no, executive privilege aside?
Well, no. So now there could be instances where someone in the White House tries to invoke executive privilege, and depending on what it is, the courts could get involved. There could be legal battles, but Congress cannot, quite honestly, Congress can't make the president or Mike Pompeo or William Barr, can't make them do anything. It's simply oversight and a request for compliance, but they can't really make them do anything, as we've seen just today.
So then, if the complaint was discussed with President Trump,
yes,
what does that mean? Why was it such a focus? Why was it being asked so much?
So I think, particularly coming from the Democrats, there was a question over whether or not McGuire, the acting director of national intelligence, discussed it with the president, and then the president would want to do some kind of either backpedaling or some kind of damage control, right? Or if there was some coordination, like, I'm not suggesting this happened, of course, that McGuire's like, hey, just want you to know, like, this thing is coming, and we're going to try to sweep it under the rug. Because what some of the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee were trying to find out, and I don't think very successfully, was whether or not McGuire was working on behalf of the president to try to be like, oh, we're not going to look at this, we're not going to talk about it, it's not a big deal because of a loyalty to the president. And I think that McGuire made it very clear that is not what was happening at all. That he acted in good faith, that he believes that the whistleblower's complaint is legitimate, and that he believes that person should be protected.
So, several Republicans on the committee referred to the complaint as secondhand hearsay.
Yes.
And they're not necessarily wrong in some of the cases.
Yes.
So what does that mean for like the public? Like, should we still be able to put stock into the complaint? Should we still trust it, or should we be like, well, if you weren't actually there for that, can we trust it?
So I think this is a great question, and I can't tell people how to feel. But what I will say is, if you read the complaint and you see its excruciating detail, right, and also that it wasn't just that this whistleblower heard a thing; it was like heard a thing, the same thing from multiple people at multiple times. And it's consistent. There is something about that that definitely we should put validity in. Now, we all know telephone is real, right? And so there could be like any form of communication where you get something potentially secondhand, where some of the things could be crossed. But then we would see inconsistencies across the people from which the whistleblower heard this information, and it is very consistent. And not all of it, as you say, was secondhand. Some of it was that the whistleblower witnessed him or herself. So I'm inclined to believe that there's at least something in there we need to find out about, and that we need to take this seriously.
So Adam Schiff, who's the head of the Intelligence Committee, said that he's meeting with the whistleblower. Will the public ever find out who the whistleblower is?
So if the Whistleblower Protection Act is followed, then no, we should not ever know who the whistleblower is. Now, if the whistleblower wants to come forward on his or her own volition and testify publicly, he or she can make that decision. Congress can't make this person come forward. The courts can't make this person come forward, because then what good is the Whistleblower Protection Act? I mean, this would then disincentivize people who feel like something needs to be reported from reporting, and that's not what we want, right? We want more people to come forward if they feel like there's something that was done that was wrong. So I would hope that at the very least, whatever the conversation sounds like, or if this person meets with Schiff personally, or with Schiff and the ranking member, or with the committee at closed door, that we at least get a transcript, like not a reconstructed transcript, a real transcript of what was said. And I would argue, especially because of Adam Schiff's opening statement last week, that is being, I would argue, misconstrued, and the president is attacking him quite overtly and calling him treasonous, that we want a word-for-word transcript of what happens as opposed to a summary.
So and I feel like from what we've been hearing from the president on his Twitter, and then what we know of the Whistleblower Act, where we have the president saying that it is an act of treason for this complaint.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, the whistleblower act allows that to happen. So is it treasonous? Is it treasonous for someone to be like, I heard this stuff?
It is treasonous if it's a lie. It is treasonous if it is fraud and if it's fake. And the president, as one would expect, is presuming all of those things to be true because it's in his best interest to do so. It also is rhetorically savvy to use words like treason and traitor and enemy of the people and some of this fiery rhetoric he uses, because it plays into a narrative that already exists about the progressive left, the socialist left, the elite media, so some of these things, this rhetoric got him elected in the first place. And so this makes sense. It's also the diversion, right? This is the whataboutism. This is what the president is known for. It's you may say I do this, but what about this? What about this? And so while he feels like people are calling him a traitor or treasonous or high crimes and misdemeanors or bribery or whatever that would get him impeached, he's like, no, look over here, look over here, look over here. And that strategy works very well for him, so it totally makes sense he's doing it. But if you look at what the definition of treason is, it doesn't fall into this category at all.
Yesterday, right? Yes.
What day is it today?
I'm so much has been happening.
I know.
It's so hard to try to keep up with
fast.
So yesterday, the Democrats subpoenaed the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. What does he have to do with the situation, and what does it mean if the president's personal attorney is involved?
So there were two names explicitly mentioned in the whistleblower complaint outside of President Trump's. It was Rudy Giuliani and Attorney General William Barr. And the suggestion was in the phone call, and even the reconstructed transcript, even though it's not word for word, expressly says that when President Trump is talking, he's saying, you should talk to Rudy about this, or you should talk to the Attorney General. Have you talked to the Justice Department? You should connect with them. And so we know that Rudy Giuliani has met with the Ukrainian president previously and other officials in Ukraine. And so really now it's the Democrats want to find out, who did you talk to, what did you know, and when did you know it? Because his name was called out multiple times in the whistleblower complaint. Now, again, the question is, Does he have attorney-client privilege? Only if he's talking about something with the president, right? Because he's his personal attorney. Does he have executive privilege? Well, he's not a White House employee. So I should do a little more digging about the constitutionality and legality of it, but from what I understand, he doesn't get to invoke executive privilege. Even if it's about the president, he's not a White House employee. So he says he's not worried about it, and he doesn't care, right? I mean, and this, of course, makes sense for him as well. I mean, he's not going to show like he's scared. But I have no idea, like, will that be public? What will we see or any of that?
So why, I hate that this is
A question?
such a thing.
Yeah.
Why is this inquiry such a, like, partisan issue?
So, I mean, President Clinton's 1998 impeachment was also a partisan issue. And so this is not uncommon for it to be as partisan. Now, the difference, though, is that even when, you know, we weren't as polarized as we are now, but we were on the way. 94 was sort of that period where we see this starting. Bill Clinton knew to stay silent about and not necessarily attack the other side, but he was good at playing the victim. So it was, I'm a victim of this process. He always was good at playing the victim about pretty much everything, right? But he never really overtly lashed out to undermine the process. In fact, he tried to, in some ways, legitimize the process in order to say, like, we will go through this and we will all see that I have nothing to hide, right? Especially once he admitted that he did lie about having the relationship with Monica Lewinsky. The difference now is what the president has done and what his counterparts in Congress, Republican counterparts, they have continually tried to undermine democratic processes in order to undermine outcomes. And so to say that this is a fraud, that this is fake, that this is treasonous, that this is just the Democrats being afraid that they can't beat him in 2020 and still bitter about 2016, and that they were really the ones that hacked the 2016 election, all of that, which is more whataboutism, is the attacking of the process. And if you attack and undermine the process, then you can't put credence in the outcome. So it's, if, let's say, the president gets impeached, let's say he's removed from office, if all along he has undermined the process, but we still come out at this as the result, it's going to be really difficult for people to accept it who have followed him along in this. And that is not what we saw the last time. We also didn't have Twitter and social media when Bill Clinton was impeached. And so everything is instant communication. And everybody wants to go online and talk about it. And we didn't have that before. So some of it is the person, some of it is the process, some of it is the time and the technology.
So now that the inquiry is happening, we're seeing the Intelligence Committee pulling people out to come talk to them, they're being subpoenaed. What comes next after all these interviews?
So arguably the next step, if anything at all happened, would be a drafting and filing of articles of impeachment. And I've had some questions about, like, what do you think is going to be in there? And so I have no idea what the details are, but we know that Article 2 of the Constitution says a president can be impeached for bribery, treason, high crimes, or misdemeanor. And so that's broad, right? The argument, at least what I've seen, is that what we would probably expect to see in there is something like abuse of power and obstruction of justice, and then how those fall under those larger categories. What the specifics would be most likely rests in that phone call with the Ukrainian president, because what legal scholars tell us is that it doesn't have to be an overt quid pro quo, it just has to be some kind of even coded language or underlying tone of, if you don't give me what I want, I'm not going to give you what you want. It's an abuse of power and of using a foreign government to try to help you win an election. It's foreign interference in an election, and some could argue that that is treasonous. I expect that that's probably what the articles would look like. And then as of right now, the count suggests that they would pass the House. The Senate is a very different story in terms of the trial and removal process.
So, and I think I personally spoke with you about this before, but if the Senate says we're not impeaching you, you are not impeached, like, continue on with your presidency.
Well, you're impeached if you get through the House, but you mean he's not removed.
Right, he's not removed.
Yes.
That's the better way of saying it.
Yeah.
What would happen if he's not reelected? Can he be tried then in a criminal court if something came out in these articles that he did break a law?
Yes. No, so yes is the answer. So if there's any number of ways, like let's say he's not impeached, nor is he removed from office, but he loses re-election. Let's say he's impeached, not removed from office, and doesn't win re-election. let's say he's impeached and removed from all the different matrices of scenarios here, right? Depending on how the statute of limitations on individual things that may have occurred and when he's out of office, he can absolutely be tried for any of those things. It could be things from the Mueller report, it could be things from the Manhattan DA's office, it could be things that are found in the articles of impeachment. Absolutely. And so it serves him well, both because why would you not want to be president anymore, but also because you may not want to be tried for something or indicted. It serves him well to stay in office as long as he possibly can.
And then for our final question, why should the public, but specifically young voters like
Yes.
those that we see on campus, not only care about what's happening, but like be following this story closely?
Yeah, I actually said this to one of my classes yesterday when we were talking about it, because it is complicated and it is confusing and it is happening so fast it's hard to keep up with it. And I was trying to explain that, 10, 20 years from now, like I'm sitting here thinking 20 years after the Bill Clinton's impeachment, like, oh, I was a first-year college student, I was a political science major, and someone's gonna ask you, like, where were you when Donald Trump was impeached? And you wanna be able to have that context and to talk about it. Because we don't know what's gonna happen, but we do know that our democratic process is very much at stake right now. And that's something we should all care about. We should all care about whether or not norms and principles of democracy are upheld at every turn, whether the Constitution is being used appropriately, whether offices are being used appropriately. If we don't care about these things, which some don't, and I find that problematic, but if we as a collective society don't care about these things, then what does it mean to have a democracy? What does it mean, right? And that's a fundamental question. And so for older voters like me, who've been in the process and we've built the social capital and we find this important, because we've seen some history with it, we can sit here on the other side of the desk and preach all we want. But why should young voters care? Because you're going to be on the other side at some point. And what happens now is going to affect what happens to you later and how the democratic norms and principles are upheld or not later. You get to say that right now, whether it is in the voting booth or whether it is just keeping up with the news and being civically engaged, taking that information, elevating conversation outside of your space and being civically participatory and role modeling that to others. That's enlightened citizenship. That's what we want.